might wonder why I'm in this. Today we're going to begin a series on the churches of Revelation. Chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation contain 7 churches. Those 7 churches are 7 real historical churches, but they're also the embodiment, 7's a pretty perfect number, the embodiment of all of the church. And there's a message to all of them, and we're going to talk about them. And some of them have kept a really good witness. Some of them have failed completely to keep a good witness, and some of them are kind of a mixed bag. And so the name of our series is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This is way too hot to wear. Okay. And today we'll be focusing on the good churches of Revelation. And as Maria read about Smyrna and what they are and the identity that they have and what they've done for Christ, we will also be talking in just a moment about Philadelphia. And I don't mean the one in Pennsylvania. I mean the one that was in Asia Minor or Turkey. But today we are going to talk about those good churches. And to be a good church, it doesn't mean that they've got the best flyers. It doesn't mean they've got the most money. Do you know what it means to be a good church in the book of Revelation? Faithful. Enduring persecution, even to the point of death. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And next week we'll be getting into the bad churches, which they're a lot of fun too. I mean, I got to be honest. But the hope is, as we go through them, as we talk about their identity, who Jesus says he is to them, and what they're supposed to do, the challenge that they're supposed to meet, hopefully we will see that in ourselves. And see that in what our church is. Because I want to tell you a little secret. Every church, there are some things that are really good. Every church, there are some things that are sometimes a little bad. And sometimes in churches, there are things that are a little bit ugly. But Blossom gets to tackle the ugly one in a couple of weeks, but I'll do good and bad, and we'll get there. All right, so we're starting in Revelation chapter 3, beginning with verse 7. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one shall shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet and learn that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word of patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial, which is coming upon the whole world, to try those who dwell upon the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast what you have so that no one may seize your crown. He who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down from God out of heaven, and my own new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. It's a funny thing to have a letter with 7 addresses, talking to 7 different groups, and it was a circular letter, so they would have passed it from one church to the other. Probably it would have gone first to Ephesus, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. But it would have passed one by one to the churches, and they basically, if you go look at a map of present-day Turkey and follow these churches, you would see them, they're in a bit of a circuit. And so this is a circuit letter written to 7 churches. But what is it that John is revealing in Revelation to the churches at Philadelphia and Smyrna? Well, all of the letters actually, or all of the addresses in this letter, they all have a similar what you'd call it, pattern. The first is Jesus identifies who he is to them. Now you're like, well, we know who Jesus is, right? But each one, the address is different because it's pulling out a different aspect of who Jesus is that they need, specifically that church needs to hear. And so he identifies himself as they need to know. Then the next thing he does is he talks about who they are. Friends, if you hear nothing else from any sermon in the world, understand this. The Bible, one of the main things the Bible tells you is who God is and who you are, and then how God relates to you. If you read a passage and you're not getting that, you may not be reading the right passage, because that is what God's trying to do. So he talks about who he is, he talks about who the church is, and then he says, now here's what you got to do. I'd say that if that's their challenge, it's probably a good challenge for us too, right? And then the last part is, and if you do it, what does victory look like? Victory, it's a great word. You know what the meaning of victory of the people is, or the Greek word that means victory of the people? Nicholas, thank you. All right. Nicholas means the victory of the people. And that's what Revelation is talking about, is victory of the people. People having victory in the name of God because of what he's able to do in them. So how does Jesus identify himself to both Smyrna and to Philadelphia? Well, to Smyrna, he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Now, what's the point? Now, we have it up here, and people, when they talk about the sides of the church, some of you will say, well, I sit on the Alpha side, and I sit on the Omega side. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that Jesus is there at the beginning and he's there at the end? No. Have you ever noticed what's right in the middle of Alpha and Omega? There's a cross in Jesus. And the idea in Hebrew understanding, when you say the names of two extremes, you mean everything in between. So when it says in the Bible, he could not say to them either good or bad, it means he couldn't say anything. Because those are the two extremes, and if you can't say either good or bad, you can say nothing. And that's the same thing with Alpha and Omega. If Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, that means that all of human history, present, past, and future, all of it, he fills completely. He is in everything and every part of human history. Jesus is there. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the one who died and is alive forevermore. Now, that might be a fairly comforting thing to hear when he's also going to tell a church, oh yeah, by the way, some of you are going to die. Now, by the way, we in America, I don't know if you know this, but we have it kind of easy as far as Christians go. I mean, yeah, there's some people that aren't real nice to churches. That's absolutely true. But around the world, there are people who are dying for the faith. I mean, real persecution of the faith. And we see that as an example of what has happened and what is happening. That is, what is happening in Smyrna and Philadelphia is persecution and even death are happening. And so he writes to them, these churches that are poor and powerless, and are going through persecution, and it's those churches in the midst of their persecution, in the midst of their death, he says to you, I am the one who is the beginning and the end. I am the one who is alive forevermore. You don't have to worry about death, because you're not going to have to worry about it being the end. You've got a promise ahead of you. That's pretty good news if you're suffering persecution. In this world, you might have injustice. In this world, you might have crime. In this world, you might have horrible things happen. You guys think does that sound familiar? Yeah. In this world, you're going to have all of that, but the justice of God has the final word, not the world. God's justice. He is the holy and dependable one, the one who holds the keys. Now, in Philadelphia, where they're being persecuted, that's the church that we just read about. In Philadelphia, they're being persecuted, and especially both churches are being persecuted by something John calls the synagogue of Satan. Now, exactly who this is, not 100% sure. It's probably not the same group who's trying to circumcise Christians, because these are not even Christians. This is a group who is slandering Christianity, saying things like Christians are eating and drinking blood. and trying to make them offensive in the eyes of the emperor and trying to get them killed. This is a pretty bad group trying to get Christians persecuted, and Philadelphia is under persecution of them. And so isn't it an amazing thing for Jesus to say, I'm the one who holds the keys. They can try to shut you out. They can try to say you don't belong to the real people of God, but I'm the one with the key, and nobody shuts the door that I open. That's pretty comforting, I would say. And by the way, that is one of the main and powerful points in the entire book of Revelation, is comfort to the afflicted. In fact, there's several times when John is in the midst of visions and he's having all these amazing things that he's trying to relate, and then he'll say, oh, by the way, if you're going through suffering, it's going to be okay. He makes a little note to people in the middle of the passage saying, everything's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. I know it's hard. It's going to be okay. So then Jesus turns to who are these churches? They are the churches that are dealing with deprivation, tribulation, slander by religious folks, and even death. It's pretty hard. And they only have a little bit of power. They don't have any wealth. And I love what he says to Smyrna, what Maria read. You are poor, but you're rich. Now, when he says you're rich, does he mean that they've got money? No, they're poor. But what they have, the wealth they have, is more abundant than the poverty they're dealing with, because they have something the world cannot take away. They have the wealth that comes from something in the spirit, not from something physical. They are poor, but they have wealth. They are powerless, but yet they are the one who holds the key and holds Jesus in their heart, and he has all the power. Right? I mean, the emperor can do a lot, but Jesus can prevent the second death. Jesus can prevent all of those things and can bring us resurrection at the end. That's pretty powerful. And these poor and powerless churches, they're to endure. That is what they're basically told they have to do. Which, by the way, it's good being one of the good churches, because then the word of Jesus to you as a challenge is keep on doing it. That's not a bad church. That's not a bad challenge. And so let's go ahead and make that challenge to ourselves. Those things in us where we are following what the kingdom requires, those things in us when we are being faithful even when things are hard, those things when we see we don't know what to do and we hit our knees and pray, keep doing that. Don't stop. No matter how hard it gets, no matter what kind of things pop up, no matter when things become difficult to share the gospel, you keep going. You keep being faithful. You keep enduring. And he says, be faithful unto death. And if you're faithful unto death, that's the challenge. You're going to get the crown of life. Now, some of you may have talked about this before. I know we've got a study on Revelation going on in our Sunday schools. But do you know what the crown is? We're not talking about a golden thing with diadems, okay? The crown in the days of Paul was not what was given to someone who was hereditary king or prince of something. The crown was given to the winner of the Olympic Games. It was a wreath. You see Caesar wearing it, although I don't think he competed in the Olympics. But it's a wreath that goes on your head if you are the victor. It is the victory wreath that goes on your head. That is the crown. And it's not just any crown, but he calls this the crown of life that you will receive. You are the winner at the game of life. That's not a bad thing. I mean, not the little board game. I know we used to play that, but the winner at the game of life. You have won life. And so the world may say, oh, they're just nothing. The world may say, oh, that's a little church. They don't have much. Or that's a church of 100 and something people. Oh, they're not as big as a 5,000 seater, right? That's you, guys, by the way. But the world may say all kinds of things about you. They may say all kinds of things about your church. But here's the little secret. If you endure, you win. Hold fast to what you have, and no one will take it from you. and hold on to faith all the way. And so what happens? I already mentioned one of these things. If you have victory, you will not be hurt by the second death. What is that? Well, we all die. These bodies, these corruptible bodies that get broken, get hurt, get sick, we will die. That's just a fact of life, right? We live with that from the moment we're born. But the second death is the ultimate death, the death of the soul. The ending of all things, whereas we don't have to worry about that because we've already been promised resurrection. That's pretty good. So if we are victorious, if we hold on, then we don't have to worry about the second death. And then I love this one, and I'm going to give you this in context, but he says to the church at Philadelphia what they're going to get, and he says that I will make you a column or a pillar in the temple of my God. What is that? Anybody know? Has anybody heard of a pillar in the temple of God? Remember that professor I told you who teaches the study called Epic of Eden, which we're going to be doing Wednesday? I helped to edit her dissertation. And her dissertation was on this subject. The pillar is what you might call in Latin a stele or a stelae. And here's what they were. Whenever some great king, whenever Caesar or some other person, whenever they would win a victory over a foreign land, they wanted to kind of, show who won. And so they would set up this massive stone pillar, and they would write their name on it to say Caesar was here, to say Pharaoh was here, to say I'm the one who's won victory. And so what he says to the church in Philadelphia is, if you are faithful, if you remain and endure in the face of all the difficulties that pop up, then you will become the sign of victory for God. You will become a pillar who will sit in his very temple, and he will not just write his name, not just the name of God, the name of God, the name of the New Jerusalem, and Jesus' brand new name will all be written on you because all have won the victory in you. So it's not just that your life will become a victory, that you will have a win in the game of life. It's not just that you're going to win, but God wins when you are faithful. God is victorious when you stick it out to the end. God is victorious, and he will put you up and set you up and write his name and go, look what I did. Look how I have won, and you will be a pillar that will never be knocked down. Because that's the other thing is when conquering kings came in and they conquered a land somebody else had conquered, guess what they'd do to that other pillar? They'd either knock it down or erase the name and put their name on it. Kind of like graffiti, but in stone. But God is never going to let that happen. If you endure to the end, if you are a faithful church, if you are a good church like the churches at Smyrna and at Philadelphia, if you endure, then you will be a person who has won the victory, the greatest victory that anyone could ever win, the victory of life. But not only will you win, but God wins through you. His victory is secured by your faith. Not a bad thing. By the way, if you're wondering if God's victory is going to be secured, I wouldn't worry about it. The game's kind of rigged. Just saying. But this is what God says to the churches. This is what God says to those who are powerless and poor, but yet they have the power of God, the power of his word, and they have the richness of his gospel. What he says to those churches and to us, and especially in as much as we are faithful as a church and as a people, is if you keep doing that, if you keep enduring, if you keep sticking it, if you keep holding the gospel strongly, then you will have victory, and you will be a sign of victory in the temple of God. Amen and amen. Now, if you will, let's stand and sing. And